Darkest Hours, or How to Torture Someone in 3 Steps or Less. For legal non-CIA reasons, I have to clarify that was a joke. Either way, well, the darkest hour, or the black moment, or the moment, or the I forgot about the power of friendship moment is the time to do it, to tear their heart out, to make them realize they never had a chance and that no girl would ever truly love them in the first place. All is lost, give up. The last piece of cake has been eaten and the cake was a lie anyway. It's that point usually around the end of the second act before they realize that actually no, things are worth fighting for and we're gonna give it the old college try chap anyway. And this video, like Brad Pitt's wife in Seven, comes to you in multiple parts.
Oh, what's in the box?
Making success meaningful, it's not over is it, don't worry about structure too much, and mental illness. I have been really slack recently at promoting Patreon, but it is important to do. My writing and world-building videos take a ton of effort and hours and research and reading and writing to put together. And more importantly though, I like my work to remain freely accessible to everyone, not behind a paywall, and Patreon is the best way to avoid doing that if I don't want to do sponsorships every episode. If you, 1, have the ability to support me, and 2, want to, then Patreon is greatly appreciated, or buying my On Writing and World-Building book, that's also just as great. I also do run 2 monthly Patreon workshops for writing over there, where we give feedback and we read through these works together that we put together. So get in on that. Limited spaces, links down in the doobly-doo. Part 1, making success meaningful. Failure or setbacks make success narratively meaningful in any story, both character failure, where they give in to their worst impulses and definitively turn away from any growth they've had, like when you have one good healthy meal, and to reward yourself you have an entire cake, 3 whole pizzas, and a lifetime supply of lolly cake. And plot failure, when the stakes are lost or the villain has even won. The Dark Knight has its darkest hour every night because Gotham only gets 2 hours of sunlight a day, but the second act ends with a plot failure after the Joker forces Batman to choose between Harvey or Rachel, and Rachel dies. Harvey is mutilated and is becoming Two-Face, and Batman is on the verge of losing his already very few allies. But it also has a character setback. He is faced with a horrible realization. He can't beat the Joker ethically, without killing, without horribly invasive surveillance technology. In this darkest hour, he's not even sure if he has a moral code anymore. Failure makes the eventual success of our characters feel earned and meaningful. It gives a cathartic release from all of that tension, because we see what it means for a character to fail personally and narratively, and the darkest hour is the most important place to do that. And yes, I know Momo's a bit chunky. I am trying to thin her down, I promise. 1, the darkest hour is the most heart-wrenching setback because it feels like the character has so much to lose at this point, after a story full of growth and change. After Batman has repeatedly tried to stick to his morals of only crippling people for life and saddling them with a lifetime of medical debt instead of killing them. And 2, it juxtaposes their success in the third act with their lowest point in the story just beforehand. It makes these story beats each stand out, the lowest and highest points. Batman's decision not to kill the Joker in the climax means so much more because he doesn't give in even after we saw him come so close to doing so. Otherwise, it's just the heroes pretty consistently getting closer to winning throughout the story structure. It doesn't get us to wonder if they're ever gonna be able to in the first place. But the real question is, how do you do this? Because your story is filled with little failures and setbacks, right? What makes the darkest hour different? Well, even if characters make mistakes or fail throughout the story, there's usually a glimmer of hope, or at least a convenient friendship power-up at the end. And to understand what that means, I think we gotta look at scene structure. Following from any kind of conflict or setback, there's usually something akin to a reactive scene, with a reaction, a dilemma, and a decision. So Boromir pulls a Here's Johnny on Frodo and the Fellowship breaks apart.
I will take the ring.
Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas are devastated. Reaction. They then must choose whether to follow Frodo and Sam or pursue Pippin and Merry. Dilemma. And though difficult, they make a decision, and hope is rekindled, a new direction. Maybe the superhero team loses to the big bad grey CGI man, but it's the first time that they've really worked together as a team. There's a glimmer of hope. It may take time, or they may agonize over it, but generally characters find a new direction to go, a new thing that might bring them closer to their goal in the long run. These scenes give weight to the conflict and move the narrative forward, introducing a new goal or strategy or obstacle. But in the darkest hour, characters don't do that. Blade Runner 2049 has probably my favourite example of a darkest hour. Deckard is captured, Joy is killed, and Kay realises he is not the born, chosen one replicant he thought he was. The foundation for all of his character growth just comes apart. And we're given that iconic Joy scene on the bridge. I love it so much. The reaction beat here is so much more intense than anything else in the film. And when faced with the dilemma whether to save Deckard, he makes the wrong decision. He turns away, he gives up. He's not stuck with the dilemma, he's not unable to decide or just processing the pain of losing Joy. The pain itself has been too much and he makes the wrong decision. He gives up. He turns away. He makes a decision that in no way brings him closer to the narrative goal. Darkest Hours aren't just meaningful because they're sad, they're meaningful because they let us explore our characters at their lowest point. That we get to see the kind of person Batman is when he gives into his darkest inclinations. That we see the existential horror on Frodo's face when he collapses on the slopes of Mount Doom and doesn't feel he can make it. That we see a world after Thanos has won and half the world is dead, like when they can't deal with these emotions, when they don't even feel there is a decision to make, or they straight up make the wrong decision. I tend to find the best Darkest Hours work not just because they're a setback or a big failure, but because they take something away from our characters that they depended on psychologically and emotionally. Kay's belief that he is the born replicant, the only one in the world, Rachel in The Dark Knight for Batman, or a mentor character. Mentors are often what bring our heroes through those reaction scene beats, processing the reaction, offering advice on the dilemma, pushing them towards a particular decision. So without them, they may feel lost. They may go through that darkest hour. The best Darkest Hours convince us of what is at stake more than anything else before, and the ones that really stick with me do it in a deeply personal way. Characters don't just suffer a plot failure, things don't just go wrong, they don't just lose, but they lose something that we care about narratively. Character struggles, or places or people they have tried to protect, or a set of circumstances that they have tried to maintain across the story, something they have tried to prevent, even theme in a way. It's really a space to interrogate the deeper ideas in your story, why they matter, the nuances around it, and what a world is like when those things aren't true, when they don't matter. And personally, I think symmetry, even if it's not that explicit, is a really cool way to bring that out. Taking all of these things to their worst place just gets us to feel, and that's what we read these stories for, right? We want to feel something for once. No, but we want to engage in these emotions and feel enraptured and drawn in and all of the range of human experience, and this is the moment that we so often get to the depths of that. Now, you will know I have a weakness for something called literary symmetry. In WALL-E, Wally dies and Eve desperately tries to restore him with memories of his old curious life on Earth. But he's just a lifeless automaton, and it's freaking heartbreaking. But it's made so much harder by this one moment where he runs over this little grasshopper. The grasshopper that he cared so much for at the beginning. It was his friend, his companion. It gives us an emotional reference point. The thing we loved, the thing destroyed. And again, this isn't like any other setback in this story because there's this sense of permanence to it. It only exists in the context of the story lead up to this moment mattering symbolically, characteristically, worldly, plotly. It's only after Eve gives up that there is any hope, because luckily this is a Pixar movie and love is like the Force. It's everywhere and can do anything the plot requires. But it needs to be said, part 2, it's not over, is it? Characters do emerge from their darkest hours and they're thrust into the third act. That was just a dash too erotic for a mostly family-friendly channel, right? Is this a family-friendly channel? Do you guys have families? Are you guys friendly? Tell me down below. Anyways, Kay comes out of it, Wally does, Frodo kind of does and then doesn't, Batman does, so how? Why does that happen? Taking something that they are emotionally dependent on, a belief, a thing, a person, it forces them to find a new way to move on. And that usually comes from what they've learned across the story. Usually there's some kind of external force that comes into their lives in this darkest moment and forces them to reconsider their decision again. Either they find something that elicits emotional change, like say Nick Fury's bloodied cards to show that Coulson died for them, that they need to unite and fight Loki. These tend to be strongest when they hark back to something personal for the hero, reminding them of the bigger picture, of the things that matter, and allowing them to see past their own pain or anger, or even process it. Or two, a lot of the time, it's a person.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
Moana, listen. Do you know who you are?
Who reminds them of the things they have learned and allows them to try again. Okay, Momo, I gotta put you down because I have to gesticulate with both my hands. In a way, The Darkest Hour has two reactive scenes right next to one another. A reaction and a dilemma, and then the wrong decision or them giving up. And then something comes into their lives and causes them to rethink their decision, to go through that reaction again, face the same dilemma, and make a different decision, And that's a structure that you don't really get to play with at other parts of your story. And because of that, it's also a great time for you to retroactively make moments and story beats in the past more meaningful by bringing them back in some way. Something that when they read it through again is going to have more meaning attached to it because they know what's coming in the future. Like the cards or Joy calling Kay Joe on the bridge. Consider not just creating a moment of despair and then a glimmer of hope, but looking at what imagery or beats can return thematically or personally to best create that despair and then that hope. It can reinforce this deeper sense of narrative continuity and pay off in a way that other setbacks don't really get to do. But there is one thing I hate with some Darkest Hours, and that's that sometimes characters will resolve every personal issue they have before they head into the third act. They'll come out of the Darkest Hour and be fully resolved emotionally and internally. And because of that, the climax is left to be mostly plot tension, not character tension. And that isn't inherently bad, but at the same time, if I've seen that a character has already resolved all of their personal issues, then I'm pretty sure they're going to save the day. I don't tend to buy into that ambiguity as much, and so the plot tension is in a way weaker in itself. And there are lots of exceptions to this, but it is something to be aware of. And we see it in television in particular all the time, but given we get most of our attachment to stories from characters, sometimes the plot tension can fall a bit flat if it doesn't have that character element. So Age of Ultron is partly messed up by how the characters either have already resolved their character arcs by the middle of the film, like Wanda, or the Darkest Hour is kinda disconnected from their arcs, like with Tony and Steve. The one character whose arc does resolve during the climax, Discount Quicksilver, isn't that interesting. There's fighting, but it's not clear what that fighting means personally, especially because even their decision to fight doesn't come out of resolving any personal issues. It's just things are sad and a decision to keep fighting. Instead, consider having them exit the Darkest Hour with a promise for growth, a chance of it, but still some uncertainty. They haven't proved to themselves or to others or the world, but they're gonna try anyway. And that ultimate test comes in the climax, where we can see who our characters really are when the chips are down, whether their change has been real, and it's set up to test the things they have learned. That's another thing that kind of sets the Darkest Hour apart from other failures and setbacks and obstacles. It is a the chips are down moment that you only get to do a couple of times in the story, here and during the climax, but in the Darkest Hour, we're meant to believe that they failed, character-wise or plot-wise. Part 3, don't worry about all this too much. With all of this focus on scene structure and symmetry, it's really easy to get caught up in thinking, especially if you're still learning, that this is the right way to do it. This is the only way to do it. And if you don't fit this structure, your story isn't good. And I want to tell you, that is not true.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
And anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying to you or trying to sell something to you. Speaking of selling to you, my Patreon. Sometimes in negative arcs where the characters change for the worst, it can be a powerful moment to have them give up on the character growth tension, but not the plot, deciding to pursue the antagonist in a bad way, thrusting them into the third act anyway. My favourite episode of Doctor Who is Waters of Mars, where the Doctor finds himself amongst a crew of scientists that he knows are about to die. but he can't save them. He can't interfere because the laws of time say that this event needs to happen. So he spends the episode getting to know them and wishing he could help till the darkest hour, and he's hopeless and he knows he needs to leave them to their fate, but he doesn't.
It's taken me all these years to realize the laws of time are mine, and they will obey me!
So yeah, the Doctor gives up on his moral code, but that decision is what triggers the third act, and he doesn't reconsider this in any reaction scene until after the climax, because this is a negative arc. And it's morally complicated because it doesn't feel like the Doctor is giving up, it feels like he's saving the day, and his despair at his lowest point is coming from him sticking to his morals. The same thing almost happens in The Dark Knight. Batman doesn't give up or walk away, he abandons his morality to pursue the Joker, setting it up for the third act with that ultimate decision. Will he kill him? Sometimes the darkest hour doesn't really come to what feels like the middle of the climax. You know, those moments where everything slows down, no, and we see our background red shirts getting shot down and everyone's going, wow, man, you guys were winning like 2 minutes ago, what the hell happened? He's thinking, oh, the power of friendship certainly didn't save Dave, and that is fine, okay? Avengers Infinity War did a weird thing where the film ends during the darkest hour, and we spend the first third of Endgame exploring what those feelings are, that reaction and dilemma and decision before they rejoin the fight. The whole action-reaction scene structure is often out of order, it's loose, and that is fine, it's just meant to help us look at what these story beats mean. Oftentimes, stories with a lot of characters or multiple POVs will have different narrative threads face their darkest hours at different points, and that's okay. That is fine, that's great even. So many rules about writing are just general guidelines that the best pieces of literature flout anyway. Like, here's a question. When is Zuko's darkest hour? No, really, because it's not during the climax when Aang has his. It's gotta be after he signs with Azula, right? When Iroh is gone and he has everything he thought he wanted, but he is miserable. We see that double reaction scene beat, right? When he makes the wrong decision before his unhappiness forces him to take another look, and May comes in and prompts that further looking into what he really wants, and he then makes the right decision and joins Team Avatar. But this whole thing takes place over several episodes, and that's several episodes before the finale anyway. So the structure here, it's loose, alright? That's fine. And sometimes a horrible catastrophe in the form of the darkest hour just doesn't fit, okay? The purpose of the darkest hour a lot of the time is to heighten that juxtaposition and feeling with the climax up here and the darkest hour down here. The intensity of that success and lowest point being right next to each other heightens the feeling of both of them. But not every story has that or needs that, okay? Sometimes stories are just written about experiences and empathizing and understanding those experiences. Like Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. It has a climax, but it's not like a triumphant victory like we often imagine. It doesn't have that we won moment. It's a character deciding who they really are and what they want to hold on to and what they want to let go of. It's pretty subtle, it's pretty low key, and it doesn't demand a darkest hour moment. You know, if you're writing about the genuine experiences of an abusive relationship, or of suicidality, or of what it's like living a high-stress job, you know, it may not follow that pattern, and that's fine. Tragic dystopian stories often don't have a darkest hour where everything feels lost, but a moment of hope, of feeling like it is going to turn out well, then to be ruined in the climax when everything falls apart. You know, we sort of get that in 1984 where Winston discovers the truth about what's been going on and he thinks he's going to be able to spread it to the world. But then, of course, he's captured and tortured, you know. There, the reverse is even better. So you've just got to look at what your story needs. The point of the darkest hour isn't that having a particular scene done in a particular way at a particular point in your story is going to improve it, or that every story needs it. It's that putting a character through a deep personal crisis in this way that the story has been building towards this entire time makes for a good story. It helps us get invested in them. And this is just one of the ways that some authors do it. You know, Don't force your story to fit this structure, use this structure to look at what your story might need or how it could be improved. Part 4, mental illness. This is something you guys know I'm passionate about, and I like to bring it into discussions like this because sometimes people use depression or suicide as the darkest hour. Like, look at that film Elf, where he's planning to throw himself off a bridge. And I get why you would want that. It's a powerful, moving, complicated emotion and scene. But here's the thing. I've talked about the good story problem before. The idea that story structure or stories a lot of people would enjoy don't necessarily reflect the realities around mental illness. Darkest hours are meant to be the lowest point for your characters, right before they, quote, win. But the reality is the depths of your worst depression or worst suicidal episodes do not come near the end of your struggles. And certainly don't stop with an epiphany about the power of friendship. It's much more likely to be somewhere in the middle of your struggles because the road to healing is long and windy and feels like you're constantly falling back or going in circles a lot of the time. This is something I think Beartown by Frederick Buckman did really well. A main character is traumatized pretty early on in the story, and we see their depression and self-destructive tendencies kind of develop across the story. And when she reaches her, quote, darkest hour, she's simultaneously considering killing herself or someone else, you're not quite sure which, but she's in an incredibly dark place. When she comes out of this darkest hour, it's not a triumphant, victorious, climactic end where everything is better. Instead, Buckman wrote it so that we understand that she's on the road to healing, but she doesn't know how long that road will be, really. Just that she has a long way to go yet. That's actually something I tried to do in my book. There's a character who self-harms and has suicidal tendencies, and the arc of the book is towards healing of a kind. But them arising out of the darkest moment isn't them getting better, it's that they choose to talk to someone for the first time. They choose to actually open up, which is a very important but often overlooked step. That is their victory, and the road ahead is still long. Mental illness just doesn't really lend itself to stories with being in the worst place and then suddenly at their best. It's just something that I think you may want to be aware of when structuring a story like this. It also doesn't easily map onto the tension of, say, a romantic relationship where breaking up makes you incredibly suicidal, but getting back together makes it perfect again. There are weird correlations between those two, but connecting them like that is just not that great an idea. I thought you might want to be aware of that. But let's bring this all together into a summary. 1. Failure makes success meaningful, and the darkest hour is the best moment to demonstrate that. 2. Setbacks throughout the story usually put characters through a reaction, dilemma, and decision, finding a new way to go. Darkest hours see characters trapped in their reaction, or making the wrong decision, or giving up entirely. 3. Darkest hours allow you to explore a character at their lowest point, their darkest inclinations, their worst fears. It often helps to take something the characters depend on psychologically or emotionally, forcing them to find a new way to look at themselves or the world. 4. Darkest hours convince us what is at stake more than anything else. Character struggles, places, or people they have tried to protect, a set of circumstances, or something they wish to prevent, or they let us see a world in which your themes are not true or don't matter. 5thly, characters tend to emerge from this darkest hour with a second reactive scene after something external, usually something they see or a person, causes them to reconsider. It also retroactively lets you make story beats that came before more meaningful with symmetry and recalls. 6. Literary symmetry is a great tool for both creating despair and hope, calling back to things from early on and creating a deeper sense of narrative continuity. 7. However, some stories just don't need this kind of darkest hour, and that is okay. Don't force your story to fit this structure, use it to look at what might help the story you have. And 8th, last of all, mental illness doesn't fit the darkest hour climactic victory struggle that we are so used to. Rather than having them merge from any harmful thoughts at the end, instead let them start on a long, windy road to healing. But that is all from me. Again, if you want to support the channel, then picking up On Writing and World Building Volume 2 or supporting me on Patreon are incredibly helpful and valued and really important to keeping the content go the way that it is. Thank you very much. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you guys in the future.